Why Europe exploded in 1914. The outbreak of the First World War in 1914 was not the result of a single event, but the culmination of long-standing political, economic, military, and social tensions that had been building across Europe for decades. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in June 1914 acted as a spark, but the explosion was made inevitable by deep-rooted causes. Europe in the early 20th century was a continent divided by rivalries, driven by nationalism, armed to the teeth, and bound by rigid alliances. 1. Nationalism. Nationalism was one of the most powerful forces shaping Europe before 1914. It encouraged intense pride in one's nation, but also bred hostility toward others. A. National rivalries. Major powers such as Germany, France, and Britain competed for prestige and dominance. France sought revenge against Germany for its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, 1870–71, and the loss of Alsace-Lorraine. B. Nationalism in the Balkans. In Eastern Europe, nationalism was even more dangerous. The Balkan region was home to many ethnic groups who wanted independence from empires such as Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. Serbia, backed by Russia, aimed to unite all Slavic peoples, directly threatening Austria-Hungary's control over Slavic territories. 2. Militarism. Militarism refers to the belief that military power is the best way to achieve national goals. European nations expanded their armies and navies. Germany and Britain engaged in a naval arms race, especially over battleships known as dreadnoughts. Military leaders gained greater influence over government policy. War plans, such as Germany's Schlieffen Plan, were rigid and encouraged rapid mobilization, making diplomacy difficult during crises. This heavy militarization meant that once conflict began, it escalated quickly. 3. Alliance system. By 1914, Europe was divided into two hostile alliance blocs: Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Italy; Triple Entente, Britain, France, Russia. These alliances were intended to provide security, but instead they created tension and fear. A conflict involving one country risked drawing in all its allies. Countries felt pressure to support their allies even when diplomacy might have prevented war. Thus, a regional dispute could easily turn into a continental war. 4. Imperialism and economic rivalry. European powers competed fiercely for colonies in Africa and Asia. Germany, a latecomer to empire building, resented Britain and France's vast empires. Colonial disputes increased suspicion and hostility among powers. Economic competition, especially industrial rivalry between Britain and Germany, further deepened tensions. Imperialism intensified nationalist pride and international rivalry. 5. The decline of empires. Several major empires were weakening before 1914. Ottoman Empire, losing control of Balkan territories, Austria-Hungary, struggling to manage diverse ethnic groups. Russian Empire, facing internal unrest and revolutionary movements. These declining empires made Europe unstable, especially in Eastern and Southeastern Europe. 6. The immediate cause: assassination at Sarajevo. On 28th of June 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was assassinated in Sarajevo by Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist. Chain reaction after the assassination. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia and issued a harsh ultimatum. Serbia accepted most demands but rejected some. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Russia mobilized to support Serbia. Germany declared war on Russia and France. Germany invaded Belgium, bringing Britain into the war. Within weeks, Europe was at war. 7. Failure of diplomacy. European leaders failed to manage the July crisis of 1914 effectively. Diplomacy was slow and mistrusted. Mobilization timetables left little room for negotiation. Leaders believed war would be short and decisive. This miscalculation proved catastrophic. Conclusion: Europe exploded in 1914 because it was a continent primed for conflict. Nationalism, militarism, imperial rivalry, alliance obligations, and declining empires created an unstable international system. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand merely ignited tensions that had been accumulating for decades. The result was the First World War, a conflict that reshaped Europe and the world forever. Part 2. Consequences and Significance. 8. Transformation of European society. The war that erupted in 1914 quickly became a total war, affecting not only soldiers, but entire societies. Millions of men were conscripted into armies. Women entered factories, farms, and offices to replace men at the front. Governments took control of industries, food supplies, and transportation. Traditional social structures weakened, and the role of women began to change permanently. 9. Human and economic cost. The explosion of war led to unprecedented destruction. Around 16 to 20 million people were killed. Millions more were wounded or permanently disabled. Entire regions of France, Belgium, and Eastern Europe were devastated. National economies were ruined by war debts and inflation. Europe, once the center of world power, emerged weakened and exhausted. 10. Collapse of old empires. The war destroyed the old imperial order in Europe. German Empire collapsed in 1918. Austria-Hungary broke apart into several new states. Ottoman Empire lost most of its territories. Russian Empire fell after the Bolshevik Revolution, 1917. New nations such as Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and Poland emerged, often with unresolved ethnic tensions. 11. Political instability and rise of extremism. Post-war Europe became politically unstable. Many people lost faith in liberal democracy. Economic hardship and resentment fueled radical ideologies. Communism spread after the Russian Revolution. Fascism later rose in Italy and Germany. The harsh Treaty of Versailles, 1919, punished Germany severely, creating bitterness that would later contribute to the outbreak of the Second World War. 12. Shift in global power. The war marked the decline of Europe's dominance. The United States emerged as a major world power. Japan expanded its influence in Asia. European countries became dependent on American loans. The balance of global power permanently shifted away from Europe. 13. Lessons from the explosion of 1914. The outbreak of war revealed several critical lessons. Blind nationalism can be destructive. Arms races increase insecurity rather than safety. Rigid alliances can turn small conflicts into global wars. Diplomacy must be flexible and continuous. These lessons influence later attempts at peace, including the formation of the League of Nations, though it ultimately failed to prevent another world war. Conclusion: extended Europe exploded in 1914 because long-term structural weaknesses met short-term political failures. The war that followed reshaped borders, societies, and international relations. Although it was called the War to End All Wars, unresolved tensions and flawed peace settlements ensured that Europe would face another catastrophic conflict only 2 decades later. The events of 1914 remain a powerful reminder of how quickly political tension can turn into global disaster. Part 3. From World War I to World War II. 14. The Treaty of Versailles and its impact. The peace settlement after World War I failed to secure lasting stability in Europe. Germany was forced to accept war guilt, Article 231. Heavy reparations weakened the German economy. German territory was reduced and its military severely limited. Many Germans viewed the treaty as a national humiliation. Rather than promoting reconciliation, the treaty deepened resentment and political anger. 15. Unstable new nations. The redrawing of Europe's map created new states but not peace. New countries included Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and Hungary. Borders were drawn without fully considering ethnic realities. Minority groups often faced discrimination and unrest. These tensions made Eastern Europe especially fragile and prone to conflict. 16. Economic crisis and the Great Depression. Europe struggled to recover after the war. War debts crippled economies. Hyperinflation struck Germany in the early 1920s. The Great Depression, 1929, caused mass unemployment and poverty. Economic hardship made extremist political movements more attractive to desperate populations. 17. Rise of dictatorships. Political instability led to the rise of authoritarian regimes. Benito Mussolini established fascism in Italy. Adolf Hitler rose to power in Germany by exploiting anger over Versailles. Military rule strengthened in several Eastern European states. These regimes rejected democracy, glorified war, and promoted aggressive nationalism. 18. Failure of collective security. The League of Nations was created to prevent future wars, but it failed. The United States never joined. The League lacked military power. Aggression by Japan, Italy, and Germany went largely unchecked. This failure showed that Europe had not learned fully from the disaster of 1914. 19. Long shadow of 1914. World War I cast a long shadow over Europe. Political borders, rivalries, and grievances from 1914 to 1919 remained unresolved. Fear, revenge, and mistrust shaped international relations. The same forces, nationalism, militarism, and alliance politics re-emerged. By 1939, Europe once again plunged into war. Final conclusion: Europe exploded in 1914 because of deep-rooted tensions that diplomacy could not contain. The war destroyed old empires but failed to create a stable peace. Instead, it planted the seeds for future conflict. Understanding why Europe exploded in 1914 is essential to understanding the violent course of 20th century European history. Part 4. Historians' views and long-term lessons. 20. Historians' interpretations of the 1914 explosion. Historians have debated for decades who was responsible for the outbreak of war and why diplomacy failed. A. The traditional view. Early historians blame Germany and Austria-Hungary, arguing that Germany encouraged Austria-Hungary to act aggressively against Serbia. German militarism and the Schlieffen Plan made war unavoidable. B. The revisionist view. Later historians suggested that no single country planned a world war. All major powers shared responsibility due to nationalism, alliances, and miscalculations. Leaders underestimated the scale and consequences of war. C. The modern view. Most modern historians agree that the war resulted from a systemic failure of European politics. The international system itself was unstable. Decisions taken during the July crisis turned a regional conflict into a global catastrophe. 21. The July crisis, a case study in failure. The July crisis of 1914 shows how Europe's diplomatic system collapsed. Austria-Hungary rushed to punish Serbia. Germany offered unconditional support, the blank check. Russia mobilized without clear coordination. Britain remained diplomatically ambiguous until late. Poor communication, fear, and rigid military plans made peaceful solutions impossible. 22. Why war seemed acceptable in 1914. Many Europeans believed war was inevitable or even beneficial. War was seen as a test of national strength. Previous wars had been short and decisive. Few leaders anticipated trench warfare or mass casualties. This mindset made compromise appear weak and war appear heroic. 23. Long-term lessons from 1914. The explosion of Europe in 1914 offers enduring lessons. Unchecked nationalism can destroy international cooperation. Arms races increase fear rather than security. Rigid alliances reduce diplomatic flexibility. Failure of dialogue can turn crises into disasters. These lessons remain relevant in modern global politics. 24. Historical significance. World War I marked a turning point in history. It ended the age of European empires. It changed warfare forever through technology and total mobilization. It reshaped political ideologies and international relations. The war redefined how nations understood power, peace, and responsibility. Overall conclusion, complete. Europe exploded in 1914 because it was trapped in a web of nationalism, militarism, imperial rivalry, and alliance obligations. Political leaders failed to manage these tensions, and the assassination at Sarajevo triggered a chain reaction that diplomacy could not stop. The resulting war transformed Europe and the world, leaving a legacy of instability that shaped the rest of the 20th century. Understanding why Europe exploded in 1914 is essential to understanding modern history itself. Part 5. Exam-focused summary, timeline, and key terms. 25. Exam-focused summary, long answer. Europe exploded in 1914 due to a combination of long-term and short-term causes. Long-term causes included aggressive nationalism, especially in the Balkans, rapid militarization and arms races, imperial and economic rivalries, and a rigid alliance system that divided Europe into hostile blocs. Several European empires were also in decline, creating instability. The immediate cause was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand at Sarajevo in June 1914. However, the failure of diplomacy during the July crisis and the rapid mobilization of armies turned a local Balkan dispute into a general European war. Thus, the war was the result of deep structural tensions rather than a single event. 26. Short answer points for exams. Nationalism created rivalry and hatred between nations. Militarism encouraged aggressive policies and war planning. Alliance system turned small conflicts into large wars. Imperialism increased competition and mistrust. Assassination at Sarajevo triggered the final crisis. 27. Timeline. Road to War, 1870 to 1914, 1870 to 71. Franco-Prussian War, Germany unified 1871. Germany annexes Alsace-Lorraine, 1890. Kaiser Wilhelm II dismisses Bismarck, 1904 to 07. Formation of the Triple Entente, 1905 and 1911. Moroccan crises, 1906 to 14. Naval arms race between Britain and Germany, 1912 to 13. Balkan Wars, 28th, June 1914. Assassination at Sarajevo, 28th July 1914. Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, 28th. Key terms and definitions: nationalism, strong pride and loyalty to one's nation; militarism, belief in the importance of military power; alliance, agreement between countries to support each other; imperialism, expansion of power through colonies, July crisis; diplomatic breakdown after the Sarajevo assassination, 29. Common exam questions: explain the role of nationalism in the outbreak of World War I. How did the alliance system contribute to war in 1914? Why was the Balkans known as the Powder Keg of Europe? Assess the importance of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Final note: the explosion of Europe in 1914 was not accidental. It was the predictable outcome of decades of tension, rivalry, and failure in leadership. Studying these causes helps explain not only World War I, but also the instability that followed throughout the 20th century. Part 6. Comparative analysis, model answers, and final perspective. 30. Long-term versus short-term causes, comparison. Long-term causes: growth of aggressive nationalism, militarism and arms races, imperial and economic rivalries. Rigid alliance system, decline of multinational empires. These created a highly unstable European system. Short-term causes: Balkan Wars, 1912 to 13. Assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Failure of diplomacy during the July crisis. Rapid military mobilization. Without the long-term causes, the assassination alone would not have led to World War. 31. The Balkans, the Powder Keg of Europe. The Balkans were central to the explosion of war because many ethnic groups wanted independence. Austria-Hungary feared losing territory. Russia supported Slavic nationalism. The Ottoman Empire was collapsing. Any small conflict in the Balkans risked involving the great powers. 32. Model answer, 10 to 12 marks. Question: why did Europe explode in 1914? Answer: Europe exploded in 1914 due to a combination of long-term tensions and immediate events. Long-term causes included nationalism, which created rivalry between nations; militarism, which encouraged arms races; imperial competition; and a rigid alliance system that divided Europe into opposing blocs. These factors made war more likely. The immediate cause was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in June 1914. However, the failure of diplomacy during the July crisis and rapid mobilization of armies turned a local Balkan dispute into a general war. Therefore, the explosion of war in 1914 was the result of deep-rooted tensions rather than a single event. 33. Common mistakes students make: blaming only the assassination, ignoring long-term causes, forgetting the role of alliances, not explaining the Balkans clearly. Avoiding these mistakes improves answers significantly. 34. Why this topic still matters today. The events of 1914 show how alliances can escalate conflicts, how nationalism can undermine peace, how poor communication can cause disaster. Modern international relations still face similar dangers. Final perspective: Europe exploded in 1914 because its political system was fragile, its nations were armed and suspicious, and its leaders failed to manage crisis responsibly. The First World War was not inevitable, but once the crisis began, the European system made peace almost impossible. Understanding this explosion is essential to understanding modern global history. Part 7. Quick revision, MCQs, and one-page wrap-up. 35. One-page revision overview. Europe exploded in 1914 because long-term tensions made peace fragile and short-term events triggered war. Nationalism encouraged rivalry and hatred, especially in the Balkans. Militarism and arms races created fear and readiness for war. Imperialism and economic competition increased distrust. A rigid alliance system ensured that a local conflict would spread. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was only the trigger. The real cause was the failure of diplomacy during the July crisis. Once mobilization began, war became unavoidable. 36. Key causes in one line: memory aid, nationalism, pride turned into hatred, militarism. Armies decided policy alliances. One war became many wars. Imperialism, competition for power, assassination. The spark, not the fire. Remember NMAIA 37. Multiple choice questions, MCQs. Which region was known as the Powder Keg of Europe? A. Scandinavia. B. Balkans. C. Western Europe. D. Iberian Peninsula? Answer: B. Balkans. Which event directly triggered World War I? A. Balkan Wars. B. Naval arms race. C. Assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. D. Franco-Prussian War. Answer: C. The alliance system before 1914 mainly. A. Prevented war. B. Encouraged peace talks. C. Escalated conflicts. D. Reduced militarism. Answer: C. Which countries supported Serbia in 1914? A. Germany. B. Britain. C. Russia. D. Italy. Answer: C. 38. Very short answers, 2 to 3 lines. Q. Why was diplomacy unsuccessful in 1914? A. Because of mistrust, rigid alliances, military timetables, and fear of appearing weak. Q. Was World War I inevitable? A. Many historians argue it was not inevitable, but the European system made war highly likely. 39. Final 5-line conclusion for exams. Europe exploded in 1914 due to a combination of nationalism, militarism, imperial rivalry, and alliance politics. The assassination at Sarajevo acted as a trigger, not the main cause. Diplomatic failure during the July crisis turned a regional dispute into a world war. The conflict reshaped Europe and global history. Understanding its causes remains crucial today.